right, you maggots, listen up.
Well, can I forget you, girl? There is always something.
All right, let me tell you what happened. I changed all these capacitors. These are, they call them dominoes. I call them street sign capacitors, but they're domino. And they're mica, and they have silver mica disease. And these came from inside the 3 IF cans, the BFO, and the discriminator. And after I did surgery on those IF cans, the discriminator and the BFO unit, I put the radio on, and then I realized I had no way to really align the radio. Now, the hero of this mess is sitting in the shadow back here. This is a DX390, and you'd say, well, how could it be the hero? Okay, with the scope, I have a scope. That's all I really got. I'll tell you about some of the real junk equipment I have. I have new equipment, but it's for transistors. So when you go to do tubes, you realize my signal generator only goes up to 5 megahertz. I needed 10.7, so I didn't have 10.7. So I sort of modified this 455 alignment board. I changed the crystal on the back to a 10.7. Well, anyway, it went really bad. I got all the hard part done, and then it was just a matter of alignment. And I realized I didn't have the equipment. So the first thing I did was I scoped out the local oscillator. This is the FM band now. I had gotten all the other bands working. So I know the local oscillator is working because I can pick it up on the DX390 when it's on FM in between the station. All right, so now we know the local oscillator is working. We confirmed it with the scope. We know it's off frequency because the guy has turned every possible trimmer cap in this radio. He screwed in every possible frickin' coil. So I'm aligning it from scratch, and I don't have really any equipment. So the first thing you have to do is you have to come in the RF front end, all right, and which is up here. This strip up in here. So I need a signal to come in there. Well, I'm sitting there thinking, okay, I could take the local oscillator. It would be the local oscillator mixer tube, which is up right here, right here. It's a Loctal tube. I bring the signal off the plate and go into the antenna terminal of the radio with like 100 picofarad cap, right? Because you don't want to take a plate of a tube and hook it to the input. So now I can follow using the scope all the way along, and I already knew that the guy had cranked in, these are tuning caps here, I knew he cranked in every single one of them all the way in tight. See, they're loose, those screws are loose, I must tighten them all up. All the posts for the IF cans, both the 455 and the 10.7, he put them in different places where they didn't belong. So I now have an oscillator that's working. It's been verified to be within the FM band, and I can peek up the front end. Now I come down, and there's a switch here, and this switches between when you're turning your would be the band switch. It switches between 455 IF and 10.7. So now I have to figure out how I can tell 10.7 is working. Well, I got my DX390, and you're saying, well, how could that do? All right, you take the DX390 and you set it for 10.7, but it's going to be, remember, amplitude modulation. 10.7 on the DX390 is an FM, it's AM, but you can still get your IF cans in with it. So you take your scope and you put it on up here on 10.7, and you turn your tuning knob for your FM, and you could see a 10.7 signal. As you tune, the stronger signal you'll see it. You'll see the noise. So now you got 10.7. So now you come down and you put your DX390 with a capacitor to the rod. I used a zero point 0.01. You take a 0.01, you run a wire over, you put it to the output of the first RF, would be the first IF amp, and then you tune your tuning knobs, or your IF can. What would you call them? They would be the adjustments on the IF can for not for the 455, for the 10.7. They'd be the slugs, and you tune them until you start hearing the FM station coming out of the DX390, and it'll be like it's the amplitude modulation crap of the mixing of the FM station and the local oscillator. See, it does produce some amplitude modulation. It's noise. It gets taken out at the limiter at the other end of the FM. So then I went along, and I had all kinds of problems getting the signal to go along at 10.7. I didn't have an oscillator to blast it. I had to use a passive signal, which is coming down through the air, going through the mixer to IF to IF to IF. Okay, that's what I had to deal with. And the guy had screwed the slugs of the IF cans way off, and I was nervous touching them. You know, that's the way I am. I'm used to fixing something that just has one problem. And this thing was loaded with, you know, the capacitors are bad, and I don't want to go in there. I want to stay on it. So anyway, I go along, and then I'm up in the limiter. I had some problems. I found a resistor. Now remember, when a capacitor goes bad in one of these radios, it usually takes out one of the screen resistor, and had a screen resistor. It was 100K screen resistor, was now reading 150. So I replaced that. I seemed to get a little more signal as I'm going along. I got up into the limiter. I got the signal up into the limiter to work a little better. Then I went back, and there was one IF can, the last one, number 3. It didn't seem to be doing anything, and that's because the guy had it so far off. I was afraid to move it. I was moving it a little bit. Then finally I said, all right, I'm on this one. I know I took that IF can apart. I know I've changed all the capacitors. So either I screwed up or I'm being too conservative. So I started moving the IF can slugs all the way out. I brought both of them all the way out. And while I was doing that, I suddenly heard some noises in the speaker. And that was my cooking. I was cooking dinner, and I have an electric stove, and it was making some RF come out of the speaker. Man, I'm getting close. So anyway, I kept tuning, going back and forth, and then finally I got out my beeper. And this is the thing I use, and it doesn't always work at high frequency, but this is remember I showed you my beeper? And when you press the button, it puts out high voltage spikes. It's a bunch of harmonics. And I'm over at the limiter, and for the first time, I'm actually getting from the first IF tube. I'm pointing to it, and it's not in the frame, but the first IF tube over down here. When I touched pin 4, hit the button, I could hear it start to come out. So I pressed the button, and I tuned the slugs on the last IF, and then I brought my DX390 over there, and suddenly I was getting the noise out of the final IF. Moved it over to the limiter. It was much louder. Then I turned the volume control up on the radio, and I put my buzz it on there, and I buzzed the first IF amp, and it came out the speaker. And that was the first time. Normally it was only coming out when I was over by the discriminator. So now I know I got an RF path all the way from the first IF all the way out through the discriminator to the audio amp to the speaker. So then I went back and I made sure I moved my DX390 back to the first IF amp, and I tuned in a station, the loudest one I could find, doing the and that I could hear it coming out of the speaker. I was like, yeah, finally. So then it's a matter of peaking up the IFs, and the guy just went in here and turned everything. And I'm very conservative. I don't touch anything that I'm not sure. And I knew I didn't have an RF generator, so I could make it worse. But I want to tell you, there has to be 75 capacitors that are bad in this radio. I think something like that. And then there's one up in here. It's down there. It's on the next to last band. It's on one of the coils. I think it's a .01 to ground, and I can't get at it. I just can't get it. I took the other parts of the radio to get the other ones, but I realized at that point, after changing all these caps, nobody else did it. Now, I did find a guy on YouTube, and he's doing a Hallicrafters SX25, and he's in front. I think his face was in the camera, and he's pointing at the IF can. He's got the IF can apart. I'm like, oh, son of a bitch! Someone actually took an IF can apart, and he says, when these caps are bad, you can't get the IF to peak. Well, it's worse than that. He's right. It won't peak. It's just like you turn the slug in and out and you get nothing. But it can be worse than that. It can be the capacitor's leaky and it's knocking out all your signal. Especially at 10.7, it really knocked out the signals. Okay, they weren't coming through, and I said I have to go do it. So these capacitors are bad on an ohm meter. You can't have that. You have to change them. And it's microsurgery down in there. I showed you. I did a video on it. I have no guilt. I've done the work. I got all the bands working. It's a matter of going in there, and some of the capacitors I had a parallel. Some of them, I got to go back and retighten up everything before I close it up. And this radio was meant for me to work a little bit each day on it, but it became a rabbit hole. And I would work on it a little bit and walk away from it, but I would think about it all day long. And I'm like, why am I having so much trouble? Well, it turned out to be all the capacitors in the IF cancer. They're bad. And, I read all the conferences, and someone did suggest that it's possible those caps could be going bad. And this is a few years ago. So I can tell who's telling the truth in these conferences by what they say. These guys, everything's so easy because they've never done it. The guys that always talk things are easy, watch them when they actually have to do something. Then it's the hardest thing in the world. This radio, I can't say this is the hardest radio in the world to work on. But I'm going to warn you, again, you got 3 different sets of schematics you're going to have to work with. There's 3 different versions of this radio. Sometimes there's parts that you find in the radio, they're not even on the schematic. And you have to determine, is that the problem? Now, thank God the guy didn't spray the band switch, the long band switch along the top here. He didn't spray this one, but he sprayed, where is it? Oh man, I'm getting dizzy here. Oh, this one here. Not in the frame. This one here. This one here does the AM wide, narrow, crystal. This is all boogered up. It's all jet black. I cleaned what I needed to get by to do what I wanted to do. Now, on the top of the radio, over in here, there's one that does AM, FM, and CW, and phono. And that guy has sprayed that to death. See, if FM doesn't work, it's got to be the FM switch. So you keep spraying the FM switch. And I dealt with people like that when I was a repairman. They were mentally ill, and in their mind, when you turn it to FM, it doesn't go to FM. It's the switch you're turning. It can't be anything else, right? There's nothing inside of a radio. And you would stand there and you tell them what you found, and they're like, oh, so you fixed the switch. And I'm realizing that now that I sit here retired, I think back to those repairs. Those people were out of their freaking minds, and they simplify everything. And I always tell you about that Unreal game, where as you're walking through it, if you start a conversation with the people that are just walking around, they have limited intelligence. And I used to call them real people background players or static. And they're people that just go through life and they only know a certain amount of things. And they're not great thinkers, and they don't stay with anything. Well, I put that away, they never get to it. And that's what I find in this hobby. You got a lot of people that are doing AA5 radios. Now, Shango, on the last video he did an AA5. It only had one IF cam, so you'll know which one I'm talking about. And he was looking for the second IF cam. And I've seen him work on a radio that only had one IF cam, but I guess he forgot. And he's like, where's the other IF cam? And I'm thinking, it only has one. And that's possible. And I remember the other radio that he had, but see, he gets a hold of these radios from people that send them, and he gets it working, then he ships it back to the person. But at one point he says, it's no real big deal, this video, because this is just another AA5. And then he mentioned about how many videos there are with AA5. The person changes the caps, maybe does a silver mica on the IFs, and that's it. They keep doing that. That's all they do, is the same type of radio. This radio is levels above that, 20 levels above one of those radios, because you got just the wafer switches alone in this thing will make you nuts, and you can't spray them because the Bakelite in these things absorbs the spray, and then if you go turn the radio on, that spray is an acid. It takes some of the metal off what you sprayed it on. It floats it through the liquid. It becomes conductive. You can actually get a burnout on the mica. It'll carbonize. You can ruin this radio. That's why when I was up in that AMCW FM switch, the contacts are jet black, and I'm saying, oh please, I hope he didn't. Oh, and when I went to take the cover off to go in there, just to follow a signal up there, all the screws were loose, and I'm like, oh, so he's been here, and yes, he did spray. So you get out the magic fairy spray, and you spray everything, and that's what these guys do. They watch the video on YouTube, and they see a guy spray, and that guy's being a little sloppy, but then they're even more sloppier. And I never seen a guy spray some cleaner into a Q-tip and then use that just to clean it. No, they sprayed a whole damn wafer switch. So in my mind, I'm trying to get away from this hobby. This hobby is a work. It's not a hobby. I mentioned that. I went back and watched one of my videos, and I said that. I came to that conclusion a few years ago. This is not a hobby. A hobby would be sitting there, turning the band, looking for different stations and listening to them. That's the hobby. Working on one of these things is work. And to realize that other people's reality on this radio is totally different than mine. You know, I have built that cap checker, which I showed you. You know, that puts high voltage across that cap. It lets you know if it's going to leak at the actual operational voltage of the radio. Now, there is a schematic out there this guy produced, and it uses 30 volts. Well, 30 volts isn't enough. And you see guys that actually do it correctly. They have one of those magic eye capacitor testers, and they put the cap in it, and then it looks good, and then they turn the voltage up, and then it fails. So you got to order all these capacitors, and you got to change them all. And in this case of this radio, 0.01s, 0.02s, and 0.05s. You can see them there. See those yellow ones? Let's see if it's in focus. Yeah, these yellow ones down here. Those are 0.02s and 0.05s. The ones that are look brown color, those are 0.01s. You have to change all those to get the AM broadcast to work. Now, the FM uses all picofarad ones. So those are, I don't know if you can see them in the picture. I use the silver mica ones, the newer type ones. Well, anyway, this is two separate radios in here. It's got an FM radio and an AM radio, and they share the RF amp, the main this selector switch, They share that. They have a front end, and there's two tubes. Both those tubes are always on. I bumped into a guy who says, on some of the bands, RF1 shuts off. No, it don't. Like I said, I got to get away from this hobby because you have so many shoot from the hip people in it and copycats. And then you got a guy like Shango. They play make-believe with a radio. And then they contact him and then they send it to him. And that's what his videos are. People that are trying to become what Shango is. And then when they screw the radio up, they send it to him, and then he has to figure out, they put the wrong value cap in, or, they put it in the wrong spot, and it's tough, undoing someone else's mess. But that guy went in here, and he sprayed stuff. He tightened down everything every tuning capacitor. He tightened down every single one of them. And like I said, I worked using the DX390, using a passive signal. See, the signal I was following is coming through the air into the radio. That would be a passive signal. And then at some point, I modified my alignment 455 oscillator for 10.7, and it wouldn't drive every section. Some sections, if you put it on the grid of a tube, it would shut down. So I have a schematic. I might make one, but I went and looked at the prices of RF generators for FM, 10.7 alignment. A lot of them didn't have they weren't crystal controlled. So, that's what I was looking for. You're talking $300-400. I'm like, you know what? I don't want to give up, but I'm not spending any more money. I spend a lot on capacitors. And there is a guy, let's see what song they're playing. Cool, huh? Yeah, boy, when that started playing, I was like, and adjusting the discriminator, that's a trip and a half. It's old discriminator. It's like the discriminators they showed me in tech school. But then we had alignment generators. See, I don't have that equipment. I don't have a $40,000 lab, with real good lighting. And I laughed at the guy when he took the BC348 apart, and he took it apart wrong. And then I'm sitting there looking at him like, and then I look at the views. It didn't get any views after he did it. So he ain't going to finish that radio up. See, I don't go for views. I went to tell you what I went through on this radio about rebuilding the IF cans. I'm telling you stuff nobody else did. That's what I do. I do radios, and then when I see I'm into something that nobody else mentions, then I go do it. All right? I think that's it for now. All right, that's it.